The rain had not stopped for 3 days when Margaret Holloway arrived in the village of Ashwell. Her editor had sent her to write a historical piece about the old stone bridge that crossed the river at the edge of the moor. It sounded simple enough: photographs, interviews, a bit of local folklore to fill the page. But from the moment she stepped off the bus, Maggie felt something different in the air. The village seemed oddly quiet, as if it were holding its breath. The shopkeepers nodded politely but quickly turned away, and when she mentioned the bridge, their faces stiffened. Her lodging was a small guest house called the Lantern's Rest, owned by an elderly widow named Mrs. Penberry. The woman greeted her with a forced smile and warned, "You'll find your room comfortable, dear. Just, do not go near the bridge after sunset." Maggie laughed it off, assuming it was local superstition. Yet that night, as the wind moaned through the chimney and the sound of the river echoed beyond the hills, she could not shake the image of that bridge, its arches swallowed by mist, its stones darkened by time. The next morning, she walked to the river bank. The bridge stood in solemn beauty, its structure ancient but sturdy. She noticed faint carvings along its edges, names, dates, even strange symbols weathered by centuries. When she leaned closer, one carving caught her breath. Thomas Ray, the keeper. Before she could think, a voice spoke behind her. "You found his name, didn't you?" She turned to see a man in a wool coat, holding a lantern even though it was broad daylight. His eyes were pale grey. "He built it," the man said quietly. "And he's been guarding it ever since." That night, back in her room, Maggie wrote the first lines of her article. But before she finished, she noticed something odd on the desk drawer, a small, leather-bound book she was certain hadn't been there before. Its first page read, in fading ink, "To whoever finds this, beware the bridge when the fog rises." And below that, a signature. Thomas Ray. Maggie could not sleep. The storm outside had grown wilder, and every gust of wind rattled the window panes like urgent knocks. The leather-bound book sat open on her bedside table, its pages curling slightly with the damp air. She had read it twice already, but something about the handwriting unsettled her. The ink strokes were uneven, as if written in haste, or fear. When morning came, she decided to visit the local archives in the village hall. The clerk, a bespectacled woman named Miss Alder, greeted her with polite reserve. At the mention of Thomas Ray, however, the woman's expression shifted. "You've been to the bridge, haven't you?" Miss Alder whispered. "People don't talk about him anymore. He was the bridge's engineer, yes, but after it collapsed in 1779, they said he was never seen again. Some claimed his body was washed downstream. Others said he stayed, to mend what could not be mended." Miss Alder hesitated before adding, "There's a tale that he appears when the fog comes, holding a lantern. The villagers call him the keeper of Ashwell Bridge." Maggie jotted down notes, suppressing her unease. Legends often sprang from guilt and tragedy. Still, when she left the hall, a thin mist was already creeping across the moor. Back at the Lantern's Rest, she found Mrs. Penberry waiting at the door. "You went to the archives, didn't you?" the widow said sharply. "Listen to me, child. When you hear the river turn quiet at night, that is when he walks." The words stayed with Maggie through supper and long after midnight. She sat at her desk, trying to write, when she heard it, the sound of water outside fading into silence. No current, no rush, only stillness. Then, a faint tapping from the window. Her pulse quickened. She rose and pulled the curtain aside. A man stood on the road, holding a lantern. Its flame flickered weakly in the fog. She could not see his face, only the outline of his coat and boots, wet, as if he had walked straight from the river. When she blinked, he was gone. Terrified yet drawn by something she couldn't explain, Maggie looked down at the book again. The ink on the final page had changed. New words had appeared, glistening darkly under the lamplight. "Do not cross the bridge when the river falls silent." I failed to stop the first collapse. I will not fail again. The fog came thicker that night, rolling in from the river like a living thing. It swallowed the trees, the cottages, even the moonlight. Maggie stood at her window, staring into the pale wall of mist that pressed against the glass. Somewhere beyond, the faint glow of a lantern flickered once, then vanished. Sleep was impossible. Every sound seemed amplified, the ticking of the clock, the creak of the floorboards, the whisper of the wind. When she could bear it no longer, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and crept downstairs. The guest house was silent. Mrs. Pembury's door was shut, but from behind it came the soft murmur of prayer. Maggie hesitated, then opened the front door. Cold air swept in, carrying the scent of wet stone and moss. She followed the path towards the bridge, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. The fog thickened with each step until she could barely see her hands. Yet she felt a pull, as though something, or someone, was guiding her. The bridge appeared at last, looming out of the mist like a ghostly archway. The air around it was unnaturally still. No birds. No current in the water below. Only silence. Maggie raised her torch, its weak beam slicing through the fog. That was when she saw him. A man stood at the center of the bridge, facing the river. His back was turned, his long coat drenched as though he had been standing in the rain for hours. In one hand, he held a lantern whose light shimmered faintly against the stone. "Hello," Maggie called. "Are you all right?" The man turned slowly. His face was pale, his eyes dark hollows. There was no expression, no life, only emptiness. "I warned them," he whispered. His voice was low, cracked, heavy with sorrow. "I told them the foundations were failing." Maggie took a hesitant step forward. "Who are you?" He looked at her, and for the briefest moment, she saw his face reflected in the lantern glass, Thomas Ray. Exactly as the old sketch in the archive had shown him. "The bridge must not take another," he murmured. "But it always demands a soul." The lantern's light flared, casting long, shifting shadows across the stones. Then he vanished, leaving only the echo of his words and the faint smell of smoke. Maggie stumbled back, heart pounding, and when she turned to run, her foot struck something on the ground. It was the leather-bound book, damp and open. A new line had been written inside, the ink glistening as if just laid down. "She has seen me now. The circle begins again." By morning, the fog had not lifted. It lingered over the village like a heavy shroud, swallowing the roofs and the church spire. Maggie had barely slept. The vision of Thomas Ray haunted her every time she closed her eyes, the hollow eyes, the voice soaked in regret. Determined to uncover the truth, she returned to the river bank after sunrise. The bridge loomed before her, veiled in grey mist. Yet now she noticed something she hadn't before, cracks between the stones, fine but spreading, as if the structure itself were breathing. She crouched beside one of the arches and traced the edges with her fingertips. The stone felt damp, pulsing faintly with warmth, like the skin of a living thing. A faint humming came from below, so soft it might have been imagined. Suddenly, a man's voice startled her. "You should not be here." It was the same villager she had met on her first day, the one with the grey eyes and the lantern. He looked pale, nervous. "They say the bridge took him because he tried to stop the council from finishing it," he said in a hushed tone. "After it collapsed, they rebuilt it over the same ground. But they never filled what was underneath." "What was underneath?" Maggie asked. He glanced at the river. "An older bridge. Roman, they say. The ground beneath is hollow, full of tunnels. No one dares to dig. Strange lights, strange sounds." Maggie's notebook trembled in her hand. "And you think he's still down there?" The man hesitated. "Not down there. Between." That night, the river rose. Rain fell in sheets, and thunder rolled over the moor. From her window, Maggie saw the water churning violently around the bridge, But the middle arch remained untouched, as if the storm bowed to it. Unable to resist, she grabbed her coat and ran outside. The air was thick with mist and the metallic scent of rain. As she reached the bridge, lightning split the sky, illuminating something that made her heart lurch. Beneath the central arch, through the gaps in the stone, water poured down into what seemed to be a void, a dark cavity beneath the bridge, vast and breathing. And in that instant, she heard the whisper again, deep and echoing like the river's voice itself. The flood cleanses, but it also remembers. The water surged higher, licking at the stones near her feet. The ground trembled. She stumbled backward, gripping the railing for balance. As she turned to run, she saw it, an outline moving within the mist, lantern glowing faintly gold. Thomas Ray was there again, standing just beyond the rising water. But this time, his face was no longer hollow, it was anguished. He lifted a hand as though pleading for her to stay away. Then came the sound, like the crack of splitting earth. The stones beneath her shuddered, and a fissure opened at her feet. A rush of air burst upward from the darkness below, carrying with it the scent of smoke, wet soil, and something ancient. In that roaring chaos, she heard his voice one last time, soft, desperate, and filled with warning. The bridge is waking. The following night, the rain had stopped, yet the river did not calm. It moved with a strange rhythm, as though something beneath its surface was breathing. Maggie sat by the window of her room, staring into the mist that still clung to the moor. She could not forget Thomas's final words, "The bridge is waking." She tried to convince herself it was exhaustion, that her mind was bending reality under fear and lack of sleep. But when she opened the leather-bound book again, her heart nearly stopped. A new page had appeared, though she hadn't written it. You cannot silence what was built on a lie. The ink shimmered faintly, as if the words were still wet. She ran her fingertips over them, and for a moment, the letters seemed to pulse beneath her touch. Determined to end the torment, Maggie returned to the bridge before dawn. The air was heavy with mist and the metallic scent of the river. In the faint light, the stones looked darker, slick with moisture, and the cracks had grown wider overnight. She knelt beside one of the pillars, shining her torch along the edges. Something gleamed within the crevice, a fragment of iron, twisted and blackened. She pulled it free, and a faint hiss escaped from the opening, like an exhalation. Suddenly, a voice rose from the water below. Not human, not clear, but layered, as if many whispers spoke at once. It carried up through the mist, weaving around her like threads of air. They buried us here. Maggie froze. The whisper deepened, forming words that clawed at her mind. Stone by stone, name by name. The bridge stands upon the fallen. Her breath caught. Images flashed in her mind, men in soaked coats working through a storm, shouting orders as the foundation gave way, the river swallowing them whole. And above it all, Thomas Ray's desperate cry, drowned by thunder. A sharp crack broke her trance. The ground beneath her feet shifted, and a section of stone near the river's edge sank slightly, revealing the entrance to a narrow stairway carved into the earth. It descended into darkness, the air below thick with the smell of wet iron and decay. She hesitated only a moment before stepping down. Her torch flickered as she entered, revealing walls lined with old bricks, black with mold. Water dripped from above in a steady rhythm. Then she saw them. Rows of wooden beams half buried in mud, remnants of an older structure. And between them, the glint of metal plaques, each engraved with a name. She knelt and brushed away the grime from one. Thomas Ray. 1741 to 1779. Her heart pounded. She turned, and the beam of her torch caught another plaque. William Rook. 1779. Then another. Henry Clark. 1779. Dozens of names, each from the same year. The whisper returned, stronger now, echoing off the tunnel walls. We held the bridge. He built it to save us. but the debt remains unpaid. Maggie stumbled backward, the torchlight trembling. Somewhere behind her, the river groaned, a low, rumbling sound as if the stones above were shifting once more. She turned toward the stairway, but the entrance was gone, swallowed by darkness. The water began to rise around her ankles, cold as ice. The whispers grew louder, forming one final sentence that seemed to come from every direction at once. The keeper waits for the one who will take his place. The rising water reached Maggie's knees before she found her voice again. She screamed for help, but the sound was swallowed by the dark. The torch in her hand flickered wildly before going out, leaving her in a void where even the air felt alive. Then came the footsteps. Soft at first, then heavier, as though someone, or something, was descending the unseen stairs above. She could hear each footfall echoing through the wet chamber. A faint glow began to spread along the walls. It wasn't the yellow of firelight, but a pale, silvery hue that pulsed gently like moonlight reflected on water. From the far end of the tunnel, a figure emerged. It was a man, or what remained of one. His coat hung in tatters, his hair white as salt, and his eyes shone faintly, as if lit from within. He carried no lantern, yet the light seemed to follow him. "You came back," he said softly. His voice was rough, like stone grinding against stone. Maggie stumbled backwards, trembling. "Who are you?" He smiled, a sorrowful, human smile that somehow made it worse. "I was once Thomas Ray. Now, I am what the bridge remembers." Her breath caught. "You're dead. You've been dead for centuries." "Death doesn't end the keeping," he murmured. "It only deepens it. When the bridge was built, we gave more than stone and sweat. We gave promise. We swore to hold it against the river's hunger. When it claimed us, it did not let us go." The water continued to rise, now swirling around Maggie's waist. The light from Thomas's presence shimmered across the surface like a restless soul. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Because you are part of it," Thomas said. "Your blood carries the line of the first architect. The bridge called you back to finish what was begun, to seal what we could not." She shook her head. "I don't understand." He extended his hand, and for a moment, the water around him stilled. "The bridge must have a keeper. One to hold it in balance. One to silence the river when it wakes. If not, it will rise, and it will claim the village as it claimed us." Her pulse raced. "You want me to take your place?" He nodded. "The keeper cannot leave. The price is time, endless and unseen. But if you walk away, the water will not stop at the bridge. It will swallow Hollowmere whole." The chamber shuddered, and a crack split the ceiling. A stream of icy water poured down, flooding faster. The whispering voices returned, overlapping in panic and plea. Thomas turned toward them, his form flickering like mist in a storm. "They feel it too. The river stirs. You must choose, Maggie." She stared at him, her mind torn between terror and disbelief. The weight of history pressed down on her, centuries of silence, of unburied truths, all resting on her shoulders. Then she remembered the notebook in her coat pocket, the last page she had seen. "You cannot silence what was built on a lie." Her hand moved instinctively toward it. "If the bridge was built on deceit," she whispered, "then it should fall." Thomas's expression changed, fear flashing across his ghostly face. "You do not know what you say." Maggie pulled the book from her pocket. The ink on the final page began to glow faintly, the words rearranging themselves into a new line before her eyes. "To break the oath, you must speak the truth." The tunnel shook violently. The water rose to her chest, roaring like a living thing. Thomas reached out in desperation, his voice breaking. "Maggie, if you speak, the bridge will die, and so will we all." But Maggie lifted her head, meeting his spectral gaze. "Then let it end." And with that, she spoke the words aloud, words that no living soul had heard since the day the bridge was built. The air split with a deafening crack. The light burst into a blinding white. The sound of rushing water drowned all else, and the world fell into silence. When Maggie opened her eyes, the world had changed. The silence that followed was unlike anything she had ever known. No roar of water. No echo of the tunnel collapsing. Only a low, rhythmic dripping that came from somewhere above. The air was heavy, cold, and tasted faintly of iron. She was lying on her side in what looked like a hollow space of earth and stone. Her clothes clung to her, soaked through. The notebook floated near her hand, its pages blank now, as if every word had been washed away. Maggie, the voice came faintly, carried by the air. She turned her head. Thomas stood a few feet away, his shape unstable, like smoke struggling to hold form. His eyes no longer glowed, they were tired, almost human. "It's over," she whispered. "I spoke the truth." He nodded slowly. "And so the oath is broken." From somewhere far above, the sound of rushing water faded into a distant murmur. The ceiling trembled, but the violent energy was gone. The bridge, she realized, had fallen silent. "What happens now?" she asked. Thomas looked around the chamber, his expression unreadable. "The river has taken what it was owed. It will sleep again, for a time. But it demanded more than the bridge, it demanded memory." He stepped closer, and for the first time, his outline began to dissolve into faint threads of light. "When the bridge dies, so do those bound to it. You freed us, Maggie. You freed them all." All around her, faint figures appeared, men, women, and children, their forms flickering like candle flames in the dark. She recognized their faces from the sketches, from the stories Mrs. Penberry had told. Generations of souls long trapped beneath the stones. They stood in silence, looking at her, not with anger, but gratitude. And one by one, they began to fade into the air. Maggie's throat tightened. "And you?" she asked softly. Thomas smiled, his face calm now, almost peaceful. "My keeping is done. I only regret you had to bear it." "I'm not sure I'll survive it," she said. "You will," he replied. "Because you were not chosen by the bridge, you chose yourself. That changes everything." A gust of wind swept through the tunnel, warm and clean. The light dimmed. Thomas raised a hand in farewell. "Tell them the river remembers," he said. "And so should they." Then he was gone. Maggie stumbled towards the faint glow that marked the surface. She climbed through loose stones, mud, and tangled roots until she broke through the ground into the open air. Dawn had arrived. The mist was gone. Where the old bridge had once stood, there was now a broken arch half submerged in calm water. The river moved gently, as if breathing again after centuries of silence. Villagers gathered on the opposite bank, staring in disbelief. Mrs. Penberry was among them, clutching her shawl to her chest. When she saw Maggie emerge from the riverbank, she wept openly. Maggie made her way across the shallows, her steps unsteady but sure. When she reached solid ground, the villagers drew back, whispering. She could see the fear in their eyes, but also awe. "The bridge," one of them murmured. "It's gone." "Yes," Maggie said quietly. "But the river still stands." And as she turned towards the horizon, sunlight broke across the valley, striking the surface of the water. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw a reflection in the current, a figure standing on the bridge that was no longer there, holding a lantern that glowed softly before fading into the light. Weeks passed, yet Maggie could not forget the river or the bridge that no longer stood. Hollowmere village had returned to its quiet life, though the shadow of the past lingered in hushed conversations and lingering glances at the water. Maggie had returned to the guest house, though she rarely stayed in the room that had led her into the river's secret. She spent her days sketching the valley, painting the river as it flowed gently past the broken arch. Every brushstroke carried the memory of what she had witnessed, and the whispers that had guided her. One evening, as the sun dipped low, she walked along the riverbank. The air was calm, the water glassy, reflecting the amber sky. She knelt to touch the surface, half expecting the water to rise as before, half hoping it would remain still. A faint ripple passed beneath her fingers. Not a wave, not a current, but a gentle pulse, like the river itself was breathing. Then she heard it, not in the air, but in her mind, a soft, almost inaudible whisper. Remember, the river remembers. Maggie closed her eyes, letting the wind play through her hair. She understood now. The river did not demand fear. It did not seek vengeance. It demanded memory, vigilance, and respect. Those who had fallen were not lost, they were carried in the current, in the very heart of the valley. The lanterns of Hollowmere village began to glow as night fell. From her vantage point, she could see the small cottages and the church, the winding paths, and the trees standing in silhouette. And in the quiet, she imagined Thomas Ray, finally at peace, his form mingling with the mist and light. Maggie whispered into the wind, carrying her promise to the river. I will remember. I will carry your memory, and I will guard the story. The water rippled once more, gentle and approving, before stilling entirely. The river had spoken. Its duty was done, and hers had begun. As Maggie walked back to the village, the stars reflected in the calm water above the broken bridge, she knew that Hollowmere would thrive, that the river would sleep in peace, and that history, the true story of the bridge, the river, and the lost souls, would live on in memory. And somewhere in the mist, faint and almost imperceptible, the soft glow of a lantern flickered, a reminder that some guardians never truly leave.